You've tuned into Radio Northern Beaches. We live stream on rnb.org.au across the northern beaches of New South Wales, Australia and all over the world. You can also catch us local on 88.7 and 90.3 FM. Our podcasts are available at your convenience at rnb.org.au or rnbpodcast.com.au. So you and your friends don't miss any episodes. Don't forget to follow and share. Now here's our latest podcast.
Hello again, listeners. Community Radio Northern Beaches, 88.7 and 90.3 FM, streaming live on our website, www.rnb.org.au. Our program's Oz Music. I'm Michael Lester. If you like the many dozens and hundreds of these in-depth discussions we've had with musicians about their music and life in music, you can catch an archive on them if you just Google Michael Lester Mixcloud. We also podcast if you Google Radio Northern Beaches podcast. We're privileged to have a discussion with a guest who's had a long life in music, with a transition from an iconic lead guitarist and instrumental band in the 1960s and a backing band, it must be said, pop rock music, The Shadows in England, through to his life here in Australia, where he lives now in Perth, and he's currently doing a tour around the country with his new music and ensemble, the Gypsy Swing Ensemble. It's going to be appearing here in Sydney as well as around the country at Chatswood on the 21st of September. I'm speaking, of course, about Hank B Marvin, the legendary lead guitarist, pioneer of the lead guitar in pop and rock music and instrumental music in the 60s, and is now deeply engaged in a completely different form of music, which he calls Gypsy Swing or Hot Swing Jazz. Thanks very much for joining us, Hank.
It's a pleasure, Michael. Thanks for having me on.
What an incredible journey in music you've made as a guitarist, from the 1960s style and feel of your Fender Strat guitar and the immaculate tones you used to get on that and melodies and rhythms, through to what you're doing now, which basically builds on 1930s jazz swing style out of Paris Hot Club with Django Reinhardt and Stefan Grappelli. How would you characterize the nature of this musical journey of yours?
It was kind of a natural progress, I suppose, Michael, because way back in 2001, I've been touring with my own band in the UK and Europe after the Shadows broke up in 1990. I've been doing some acoustic stuff on stage as part of the show, and a lot of the fans were suggesting I recorded an acoustic album, which I did. It was called Guitar Player, and it was a very successful album for me. And at that time, I started to listen again to Django Reinhardt, who was one of the great guitar innovators in the 20th century. And it really got me intrigued. And I thought, well, this is great, to be able to sort of put the electric guitar to one side and pick up an acoustic and just play without all the trappings of amplifiers and all the rest of it. So anyway, I recorded this album, and coincidentally, I bought an old gypsy jazz guitar, French guitar called a Favino, and I used that on most of the tracks on the album. And it got a very good reception. And around that time, myself and one of the guys in the quartet, Gary Taylor, who'd played some guitar and bass guitar on some of my previous albums, we got together and started trying to learn some of these old tunes, because some of them were great little tunes, and I remembered some of them from my childhood. So we started to mess around with it, and then we got Nunzio Mondio on the accordion, wonderful player who's played on a lot of my normal albums on keyboards and piano as well as accordion. And we sort of messed around with some of these numbers. Someone heard us play, got us to do a few charity shows. We did that. Then we got invited to jazz clubs. We did that. And we thought, hey, we better sort of take this a bit more seriously. And we started working on new arrangements for these things. So what we've done, we've kind of taken that bass music, Michael, try to keep the essence of it and give it a new look with different arrangements and so forth. Because obviously our influences are things like classical, big band jazz, rock and roll, folk blues, all of that gets put into the melting pot and comes out in the music. That's how it kind of happened. Then we recorded a couple of albums which have done really well in the jazz world, and we're very happy with that. And here we are, and it's kind of a hobby for me now. I don't tour very often, Michael. I don't want to be traveling around too much, having done so much over the years, as you can appreciate. But it's nice to just see parts of Australia that I haven't seen either for a long time or never before, which is what we've done a few times.
Yeah, well, I think the last time you were in Sydney was maybe 10 years ago. I do remember you used to tour through here with the late generation Shadows, didn't you, through the 80s, and you made a few visits. But what prompted your move to Australia to live permanently into Perth?
It was a typing error. I thought we were going to Penrith in the UK, and we ended up in Perth.
Oh, come on.
The serious answer to that question, Michael, is my wife and I were considering moving away from the UK. I don't like the cold, you see, and so we thought we'd go somewhere warmer, and we were building a house in Menorca, which is a Spanish island in the Mediterranean. And after we discovered too late, in fact, that they didn't have any English-speaking schools for our two youngest on the island. So that was a big problem. So we decided then to sell the property. And I said to my wife, look, why not Australia? They can almost speak English in Australia. I apologize for that cheap joke.
I know.
And we, our then manager, Peter Gormley, who was originally from Sydney, wonderful man, sadly no longer with us, but a really fine, honest, and good manager, like his second father to us, really. He said, Hank, he said, why don't you go to Perth? He said, that's a city for the future. But also, Michael, we wanted to get away from big cities like London. So Sydney and Melbourne, to me, were just, again, big cities, lots of people. Perth was a much more laid back, kind of relaxed place, great beaches. It just suited us. So we came here and we thought we'd give it 2 years. And if it didn't work, we go somewhere else. Well, it did work. And here we are, sort of nearly 40 years later.
Harking back to your musical times back with the Shadows, in terms of the music and the technique, again, how would you characterize the challenges and innovations that you were confronted with and put in place? You were very much a pioneer in the development of instrumental groups, if you like, in those early days, and in the technique and tone and sound and feel and immaculate phrasing that you have too. What were the challenges that you had to rise to and the innovations that this involved in that era for you musically?
I suppose one of the challenges was really trying to play the guitar as best as I could. But also, I was aware, Michael, that whilst initially I was copying or trying to copy some of my American guitar heroes, like Scotty Moore with Elvis, Cliff Gallup on the early Gene Vincent records, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, and others. The thing was, after a while, you use that as a launching pad to sort of learn phrases and maybe a certain approach to music. Then after a while, hopefully, your own ideas start coming through. And I was fortunate in that Cliff bought me this Stratocaster back in 1959 with what they used to call a tremolo arm. It's actually a vibrato bar on the guitar. And I quickly learned how to use that see, in those days, we had really heavy strings and you couldn't bend them very easily. So I could use a combination of pushing the second string up and pulling this vibrato bar upwards, which lifted the pitch of the string to create a full tone bend on the string. And also I could create a vibrato effect, which people now do with their fingers on light gauge strings, but you couldn't do that on those guitars. And also I could dip the string, like hit a note and dip it down slightly, like a singer might do it. So I was trying to incorporate all these different techniques. Plus, one important factor was the echo box. I discovered this echo box in 1959. And initially, I just thought, wow, that gives me the chance to make the guitar sound they do on the records. Often those American records had a little bit of tape echo delay on the lead guitars. Sounded great. So I was able to achieve that. But I discovered that this little Miazzi echo box had about 5 or 6 different heads. And by combinations, you could get all kind of multi-tapped echoes. And I found out that if certain echoes worked with certain numbers on the tempo, and I could adjust the speed of the echo to try to match as close as I could to the tempo we were playing at. And it just started to work. And so when we recorded Apache, it had a combination of me using what is now known as the whammy bar, the vibrato bar, and the echo on the guitar, and then a Vox amplifier, of course, which to me worked beautifully with the Strat. And suddenly I had a sound and an approach which everyone seemed to like, and I was very happy about that, I can tell you.
We're on Radio Northern Beaches Oz Music with our guest, Hank Marvin, who's going to be touring here in Sydney, part of a national tour in Chatswood, Sunday 21 September, with his new ensemble, the Gypsy Swing Ensemble. What's the challenge confronting you, or has it been, in coming to terms with this new style of music, this hot swing, jazz-based music, as I say, from the 1930s in Paris, from a man, as you say, who was a great innovator in technique and style, and really was one of the first people to bring the guitar as a lead instrument in the jazz form, just as you'd been in bringing it into instrumental music.
Yeah, with Django, he was a gypsy, in fact. He was a gypsy himself. He played with a lot of gypsy influences in his playing, hence why they refer to as gypsy swing, with a lot of ornamentation in his playing. But he had techniques which a lot of rock and blues players use today. For example, he used finger vibrato, which is very common these days on light gauge strings. He often used octaves, which a lot of jazz players use now, playing sort of passages in octave form rather than single note form. He used a lot of big band chords and stabs to make it sound almost orchestral sometimes behind, say, Stefan's violin. And he used to bend strings too, which was, again, unusual at the time. So all these were techniques that most people have adopted and use, and including myself. So when it came to playing this music, Michael, it was obviously playing one of these gypsy jazz guitars is quite different from playing a Stratocaster. They're acoustic for the first. The first thing is an acoustic guitar. Secondly, they're slightly, for those who play guitar, they will know what I'm talking about. Those who don't, the scale of the guitar is longer, which means from the nuts where the strings that's at the end of the neck, where the strings come over there, run down the neck to what is called the bridge, and they run over the bridge. That is the longest. That distance is longer than on most modern guitars by about an inch or so. So I've got smallish hands, so it's a little bit more difficult to play. So these were some of the challenges. Plus, what we're doing now, well, I've never had a problem with actually the swing feel, because when I was a kid, we heard a lot of it on the radio, with big bands like Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, and jazz things. I used to be a big trad jazz fan. So that feel in itself was not a problem. It's adapting this to playing on this specific style of guitar, because they do have a sound which is different from the normal flat top acoustic guitars. And of course, improvising. As I mentioned earlier, worked out a lot of really good arrangements, which people seem to be very impressed with. But there's still a certain amount of improvisation. And so that's a new area for me. I mean, I've improvised on rock and roll stuff and bluesy stuff, but never before in this kind of music until about, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago. So here we are. And it seems to be working pretty well at the moment. And what's a great thing for me, Michael, is when we do these shows, a lot of the fans are Shadows fans who come along. And many of them have not heard this sort of music before. They don't know what to expect. But the great thing is they seem to love it. We get, wonderful response to the music. And I'm very happy about that, because it is good. A lot of good tunes, and we're not indulgent. We don't sort of improvise for like 5-minute solos and things like this, which can leave people bored to death. We don't do that. It's much more to the point. And as I say, good tunes. And we have some good arrangement, and people seem to really enjoy it, which is terrific.
We're talking with Hank Marvin on Oz Music Radio Northern Beaches. Hank, as you described, there are lots of elements of continuity over your life in music, from the particular forms of the 60s to the ones you're now playing, reflecting perhaps more of that 1930s jazz style away from pop. But there are also, as you've said, a lot of challenges and innovations that you had to come up, and adaptations to your music and to your playing. These numbers that you do, presumably primarily from this Hot Swing catalogue, you do your own arrangements, but you do your own arrangements of some Shadows songs too, and other songs. What's involved in the nature of the arrangement process that you have to engage in?
Well, we basically take a piece of music we think it will work for us, and because it's probably a good tune or something really that we like about it, and then we kick it around. We choose a key, we choose a tempo. And then we start getting ideas for intros, for actual arrangements, maybe change the chords here and there a little bit in certain parts. And then gradually we build it up through a bit of trial and error, and we all toss our ideas in. Eventually we get to where we wanted to be. An example of that is one of the numbers we do live, and it was on our latest album, Foolin with the Feds, is a piece of music by Chick Corea, the great modern jazz musician. When I say modern, not that his jazz is modern, it's like jazz fusion, but he's a modern musician. I wanted to do this, and I persuaded the other guys to have a go at it, and we looked at it, and it's a really difficult piece of music, but we wanted to do it differently from the way anyone else had done it, which we've done. And it works really well and gets a great response from audiences. But that was a challenge. It took us a long while. It's because we're not getting together every day, but we just kept tossing ideas in and changing it if we felt it didn't work. And eventually we arrived at what we thought was the ultimate way for us of doing it. And which is the amount, da-da-da. Yeah, it starts off with that. We do a bit of that. Then it goes into the actual Chick Corea Spain. Now, with Shadows numbers, for example, we do a version of Guitar Tango, which is a great tune. And funnily enough, that was actually recorded on an acoustic guitar originally by the Shads. We've rearranged that. The basic number remains the same. We've got a different intro to it, and we have an extension, like an appendix at the end, which works really well, and audiences seem to really enjoy the difference, because what they're getting is basically the piece of music as they know, but with some extras, if you like, on it. Another number is Nivram, which was a track on the very first Shadows album, and it was kind of slightly in the jazz idiom. Bruce and I played the melody and harmony on our guitars, and I took a solo. Jet Harris took a solo on bass guitar, unusual at the time. It became a sort of fan favorite, and we often performed it live. We thought that would work well in this genre, so we do it as a sort of gypsy jazz type piece now. It's basically the same piece, slightly different arrangement, and so forth, but not a great deal different. And it begins with part of the slow movement from Rodrigo's guitar concerto Daranthwaith.
Your music's always displayed a great empathy and sympathy and love for great tunes, haven't you? Whether it goes back to the Shadows or to what you're doing now, as we're hearing. You cut your teeth through all those great years and with a band, an instrumental band, I guess, a rock pop band, but you were also a backing band to one of the most successful ever British rock singers, Cliff Richards. What's the difference for you musically and as a guitarist in, on the one hand, playing as an instrumentalist with your own bands and with the Shadows and backing up a singer, a popular singer and rock singer like Cliff Richards?
Yes, well, originally, as you say, we were Cliff's backing group, and I have to say, Cliff was it was an unusual association at the time because it was more like a five-piece band, Michael. Cliff used to hang around with us all the time on tour. We used to write songs together. We'd go to the movies together. It was more like a five-piece band rather than a singer and a separate group. And Cliff was very, if you excuse the pun, instrumental in getting us our first recording contract because Bruce and I used to sing in harmony, and we'd do things with Cliff. And Cliff said, "You guys should be recording." So he spoke to Nori. Nori gave us a recording contract, and purely by chance, we became an instrumental group, which I have no complaints about. But the difference is, when we were working with Cliff, we would all get together and work out the arrangements, the routine of how we're going to do these songs that Cliff had chosen. And he'd get our opinion, too, on things. And then, obviously, you're keeping in mind that Cliff is the vocal is the focus of the treatment you're given to the song. So whatever we would do behind has to enhance Cliff. I usually felt to me to think of an introduction, like a little phrase like the young ones, da 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 da, and then there's usually a little guitar solo in there. But the rest of the time, you had to be conscious you were supporting the focus of the voice and try to not get in the way. Just enhance it. Doing an instrumental was similar in the sense that we still had to routine and do an arrangement. And again, it usually fell to me to come up with a little introductory motif, as in Apache or Wonderful Land, whatever it was. But there's no singer. My guitar became the voice. So that was different. So I didn't have to worry about just doing something behind Cliff, but rather had to be prepared to sell the tune out front on the guitar. So that's the main difference, really. One is the lead guitar is the voice of the instrumental, but behind Cliff was the voice, and we enhanced his singer, or tried to.
Well, thank you very much, Hank Marvin, for joining us here on Oz Music Radio Northern Beaches, for sharing a bit of an insight into the incredible journey you've made through music over your life in music, and still so active and dynamic in what you're doing and innovative and breaking new frontiers now with your show that we're going to be seeing in Sydney for the first time in 15 years, listeners. If you go along to the concourse at Chatswood, Sunday the 21st of September, to hear Hank and his fusion of swing, soul, and with his gypsy swing ensemble. It's been a real pleasure and privilege talking with you, Hank, and wish you all the best.
Yeah, well, look forward to meeting you there, Michael. Thanks for the interview. It's nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
All the best to you as well, and to your listeners.
Australia, the lucky country. We've got meat pies. We've got the world's best beer. But most importantly, top of the list, we've got Radio Northern Beaches 88.7, 90.3. Now hitting the entire world on www.rnb.org.au.